Before we dive into last Epoch, I wanted to talk about my exposure to aRPGs up until now. I've played a lot of them, some that you'd be familiar with like Diablo 2 and 3, Path of Exile and Grim Dawn, and some that are less present in the conversation of late, Sacred 2, Torchlight 2, and Silverfall. Ah, Silverfall. Did anyone else play Silverfall? Or was I the only one? No? Just me? Yeah, that figures. I've been more of a casual noob than one of those godlike aRPGers that crafts an unkillable light wizard with a 100% crit rate and a laser of ultimate screaming death. My main aRPG for a while has been Grim Dawn. I've spent about 130 hours in it. Heaps of classes that you combine with a skill tree that you can tweak, you can play multiplayer or solo, and there's a vanity transmog system that allows you to wear the exact item that has the best stats for your character and match it with the visual style that's best for your outfit. Because if there's one thing that's more important than kicking ass, it's looking good while doing it. So, while reviewing last Epoch, I wanted to know if this would be my new go-to aRPG. There's enough people comparing Epoch to Diablo 4 and saying that it's a Diablo killer, but let's face it, D4 was already entering rigor mortis before Epoch even released. In my world, Grim Dawn is the reigning king and is the only one worthy of a comparison. Epoch has a storyline, I presume, and I'd love to tell you what it is. I feel guilty because I'm sure many hours were spent crafting this time-jumping tale across eons. I did get a bit of a gist, and this is what it is. Long ago, Eterra, the supreme entity of life, created the world, the creatures, and the people of the world. She also created 4 gods: ice, desert, water, and fire. And there was peace, until the Fire Nation attacked. I mean, the fire god, R'yeh, who turns out is the brother of Na'Yeh, the bogan god of Australian agreements. Anyway, the fire god thinks he's the duck's nuts and he wants to prove it by setting the world on fire before global warming beats him to the punch. To help him along, he wants these shards of Epoch, which have some kind of power that's reminiscent of Eterra, the life entity, and gives the power of time travel and presumably other awesome gifts as well. So the game has you bouncing around various times to both combat R'yeh's conquest of the planet, as well as the collapse of the world into the void at the end of time. Just a standard Tuesday, really. What you'll actually be doing during the game is a lot of clicking. You pick one of the 5 starting classes: Sentinel, which is pretty much a warrior; Rogue, Primalist, which is sort of like a druid or a barbarian; Mage, or the Acolyte, which is sort of like the necromancer. Each of these can later specialise into 3 different talents, giving a total of 15 potential endgame characters. Like any good aRPG, you pick your skills, you level them up, you click, click, click until everything on screen is dead. Now that's most of the same stuff we've seen before in other aRPGs. Let's talk about the differences. Right off the bat, I want to mention the offline mode. Thank the maker. This game had some server issues on launch, and I think the offline mode has really helped a lot of people not go insane on the internet. I was a bit disappointed to discover after the fact that if you make an offline character, they can never be converted to online. As in, if you start a character offline, you'll never be able to play that one with your friends. Now, Grim Dawn had this nailed, and unfortunately Epoch hasn't been able to replicate that effort. You could play with your character offline as well as online, and it didn't matter. But look, I'm happy there is an offline mode at all. When there's server downtimes or you've got poor connections, at least you can have a game offline. I found the combat pretty good. The majority of attacks are telegraphed, and the displayed areas of potential damage seem really accurate, such that even if I stand outside of the indicated line, but really close, I still won't take damage. Normally with aRPG combat, I'm accepting the fact that it's mostly going to be a game of stand there, hit the enemy, and see whose health runs out first. But there's a bit more to this. There were a few boss fights that I was able to get up in close and do damage, until the indicated attack appeared, and just before it launched, I could teleport through the boss, turn around, and attack his back before he'd need to finish his wind-up, turn around and face me, and I would just rinse and repeat this. It was really quite fun to time it, and the hits feel meaty. The pacing of unlocks is good too. Skills are meted out at a good rate, and leveling felt pretty fast. There is always an issue with these kind of games of too much loot and not enough inventory, but Epoch gives you a stash with pretty much as many tabs as you'd like. In addition, it has one of the best loot filters that I think I've seen. It allows very specific instructions to allow a very customized experience. And even better, loot filters can be shared and downloaded with friends. So for example, with my Acolyte character, I wanted some lifesteal weapons, so I selected the option of hide normal rarity items and hide magic rarity items, and make the lifesteal weapons show up as red with bolded text. What a great idea, right? Next difference is the skills. This hits a very sweet spot of being nicely approachable, while still retaining enough complexity later on for you to really specialize your character as you like. So obviously the starting skills are all from one of the original 5 classes that you pick. When you progress enough in the story, you'll be able to choose a subclass, and then that skill tree becomes available to you as well. There's further customization in terms of the skills in the form of specialization. To explain further, let me show you my Lich, which is a subclass of the Acolyte. I have Acolyte skills and Lich skills that I can use, but I only have room for 5 on the hotbar at any given time. As you progress, you're able to alter up to 5 of your skills in their own separate skill tree, which may drastically change that skill, how it procs, and what damage it does. So I've focused mainly on necrotic damage. I've altered some of my debuffs to do mainly necrotic damage. My main attack, which I think is called Harvest, normally does physical damage, but I've changed that to necrotic damage through its skill tree. And I've dived into the Reaper form, and I've specialized the skill tree to do waves of necrotic damage with other perks. So if I get items that do increased percentage of necrotic damage, I'm living on easy street. These skills can be respecced fairly easily, but there seems to be a little bit of a penalty as you don't get all the points back to reinvest in another skill. It seems each skill tree has a kind of experience journey of its own, and you'll need to use it a little bit more in order for it to level up. I found that it doesn't take too long of using a new skill to catch up reasonably closely to the other skills that you already have on your bar. The different eras that you time travel through can have varying levels of colour and mood. Some are bright, colourful, and hope-filled, like the Divine era, and others are bleak and adequately morbid, like the collapsing void at the end of time. There's a really good variety of enemies too that have appropriate design for the environment and are fun to dispatch. I really enjoyed smashing the beaks of all the bird people.
In bird culture, this is considered a dick move.
The crafting system is also quite good and easily understood once you've used it a few times. It can look a bit intimidating at first glance, but once I played with a few items I didn't really care about to learn what was what, I got the idea pretty quickly. I would also say the crafting I think is pretty necessary to level up and do adequate levels of damage. You can remove a quality, add a quality, enhance a quality, or upgrade the class of item with the crafting. Each item only has a set amount of forging, or number of attempts that you can mess with it with the crafting. So you're not able to eternally buff something until it's god tier. So, what's not good? Well, mostly there's minor issues for me. There's been no crashes. I will say even in offline mode, there is a little too much input lag between keyboard and the action on screen. Like for example, I'll hit the teleport power of my Acolyte, and she'll leave it about a second before she decides to go along with my advice. This actually has led to a lot of deaths that probably could have been avoided, which is fine because I'm not playing hardcore mode, but if I was playing hardcore mode, I'd be proper pissed. I haven't seen much discussion online regarding this, so maybe it's just my rig, but I have played it on both my desktop and my laptop, and I've had similar results. I also found the typical annoying jank, like loading into a new area and accidentally clicking the screen in the wrong direction, which immediately walks me back into the loading screen to be dumped into the previous area all over again. Also, I had this legendary hammer drop in a completely unattainable and unavailable location. I tried destroying the environment and teleporting to try and pick it up, but for love nor money, I couldn't get to it. And I was just forced to leave it there, which was super frustrating.
My space sword!
I've played Epoch for about 28 hours now, and I haven't quite finished the main campaign. I have been taking it fairly easy, but I've leveled up enough to be able to check out some of the endgame content called monoliths. These are like mini floating islands or mini dungeons that have randomly generated bosses and some pretty excellent loot at the end of it as well. They seem like pretty fun ways to extend the playtime, but I think it will vary from person to person as to how effective this will be in terms of keeping players interested. I've mainly been playing as the Lich, who I think now is about level 59. I've also tried the Wizard briefly, and I played as the Sentinel class, focusing on a spin to win build, and I found that really quite fun to play. Given I haven't been able to glance too much of the endgame, I considered calling this a first impressions rather than a review, but I figured if I laid out my experience with the game, you can decide whether it's enough for you to be interested or not. For the asking price of $50 Australian, there's enough value for money here, and probably more so if this is your kind of game and you really dive into the endgame content. So to answer my question at the start of the video, is Last Epoch now my new go-to aRPG, taking over from the previous champion that was Grim Dawn? Yeah, I feel pretty confident in saying so. There's a lot to like about Last Epoch. The few points that it has over Grim Dawn is I really like the variety of enemies, I like the scale of the battle, and I like the time traveling mechanic. The graphics and environments do tend to be a little bit more vibrant and colourful than Grim Dawn, and I am a massive fan of that skill tree where you can really hammer down and quite drastically change how each skill operates. It's so much easier to understand and comprehend compared to something like Path of Exile, which is just a scary map of dots. If I was speaking to the devs of Last Epoch right now, the thing I would say is invest in a transmog system for characters. That would be really great. If you're able to alter the cosmetic look of your character and keep the item affixes, that would be fantastic. The other thing that'd be great would be the fact that if we could have offline characters be able to be used online as well. But from the conversation that I've seen online and what I gather from game development, it seems that this is just a limitation of the design and probably not something that we're going to see in future. But look, the game is great as is. It's heaps of fun. I recommend it.